Around recording. Oh, we're working now. Okay, carrying on. So glad to see everyone here today, and I will pass to Nadia.
Good morning, everyone. I serve as a co-chair to the Just Transition Subcommittee, and I'm currently a law clerk at the law offices of Wilmington, Campbell, Benton, Stasny. I will pass it over to Ross.
Hello, everyone. Ross McDonald, Public Transit Program Manager at VTrans, and I'll pass it over to Liz.
Hi, everybody. I'm Liz. I am staff support from the DEC, an Eco-AmeriCorps member, and I use she, her pronouns, and I will pass it over to Kelly.
Hello, glad to be back. I'm Kelly Klein. I am the owner of Grenfell Meadery and Havoc Mead, and also a new mother. My son is 2.5 weeks old, so I took a couple weeks off, and I'm a member of the Climate Council and this committee, as well as cross-sector mitigation. Let's see, Chris.
Hey, Chris Campany, Wyndham Regional Commission, council member appointed by the House to represent municipal interests. Glad to be here. Danielle.
Hi, Danielle Bombardier. I am a union electrician and a labor representative with the Vermont AFL-CIO. And I will pass to Kashka.
Hello, my name is Kashka Orlo, and I use she and her pronouns, and I am here representing the low income sector. I will pass it to Kira.
Hello, my name is Kira. I am a recently graduated college student, and I am interested in social justice. So I'm just here to learn, to see what's happening. And I use she, her pronouns. I'll pass to Becca.
Becca, I'm not sure. I'll pick it up instead. I'm Sarah Phillips. I'm one of the co-chairs on the council. I work for the Department for Children and Families, and I will tag Jennifer. Oh, Jennifer just turned her camera off.
I just want to I think it's fine for Becca. You asked, is it okay to introduce yourself? Please do. It's fine. Thank you.
I was more saying I was called that last time too, and I'm having to introduce myself. I've been showing up to these, but I'm not a council member, so that's why I wasn't introducing myself. But I'm Becca Custer, and I am the AmeriCorps member serving with VNRC, just here to listen and take notes. So thank you.
Great. Jennifer, why don't you go?
Yeah, sorry, Sean was calling me Sarah, so I'm like, wait, Sarah, Sean. I'm Jennifer Micah. I'm use she, her pronouns. I am general counsel for Department for Children and Families. And I hope to be representing people with disabilities and people who are affected by poverty and other traumas. Thank you.
All right, I'll try to keep it going. David.
Hi, everybody. My name is David Plum. I work with an organization called the Consensus Building Institute, and we are helping to facilitate the work of the council and of subcommittees. I'm very happy to be here. Amanda?
Thanks, David. My name is Amanda Carlson, and I work with Sue at Capstone Community Action, and I'm here to staff this committee. And I will pass it off to Abby.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm Abby Willard from the Agency of Agriculture. I'm the director of our Ag Development Division and also staff support to this subcommittee. And I'll pass to Jane.
Afternoon, everybody. Jane Lazorchak. I'm the program director for the Global Warming Solutions Act, and happy to join you as I do most weeks this week. So thanks, everybody. I think everybody, maybe Liz, have you not said hello today, or did you already?
I did, but hi again.
Hi again.
I think we have all the members and staff members, but I do want to recognize other members of the public. Please feel welcome. If it's okay, I'll just call on your name and you can hop in quickly. Cheryl, I see. Cheryl Hogan.
Hi, this is Cheryl. Thanks for letting me speak. And I've just been following some of your meetings. I'm really appreciative of the effort and interested in climate improvement and specifically reducing transportation emissions and reaching those in rural communities. I live in rural Vermont. So thank you.
Thank you. And we're being real quick, so I appreciate that, Cheryl. Carl?
Yes, I've been following some of the subcommittee meetings. I'm on the Rygate committee and Rygate and climate change, and just so I try to follow as much as you folks are doing, and congratulations for what you're trying for.
Thank you. I want to recognize, is Claire here? Maybe she didn't get to introduce herself, staff.
Yeah, sorry, I'm here. I didn't want to interrupt, but I'm
Thanks,
Claire McElvenney. I am staff support. I'm a senior energy policy and program analyst at the Public Service Department. So
thanks, Claire. I'm sorry I didn't see you at
That's
first.
okay.
I see Pat.
Hi. Sorry, the phone just rang as you said that. Thanks so much. My name is Pat Sagri, and I live in Westfield and chair our planning commission. And so come at this from very small towns and impacts to the smallest of the small towns. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. I see Steve Crowley.
Hi, everybody. Steve Crowley in South Burlington. I'm with Vermont Sierra Club, a volunteer, and I chair the National Sierras Adaptation and Resilience Task Force. So very interested in seeing how equity gets worked out in Vermont. So appreciate all your work. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and I think there's a couple more members of our public here. N.R. McDonald.
Hi there. This is Nina McDonald. Hi, Sue.
Oh, Nina.
Let me turn on my video there. I'm just here as an interested member of the public. I work for the High Meadows Fund. This is something that's near and dear to my heart, and I'm basically here on my own time because I'm very interested in the topic in the committee. So thank you.
Okay. I think we got everyone that I see. If I didn't recognize you yet, please speak up if you would like to be introduced. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us on a beautiful Thursday afternoon. The sun came out. I even went out and felt it for a moment just before this. So I'm glad we're here together. And I actually want to just pass. I think we're going to look quickly to make sure. Are there any announcements? Okay, we're going to do announcements and report back from the other subcommittees before we move to our community listen. So let's ask Jane, are there any announcements that you would like to share?
I guess only and most related to all of your work. David and I had a really nice meeting yesterday with our Climate Access and RISE partners to sort of onboard and talk about how the relationship will work in the coming weeks and months and how they'll start to get feedback from the other subcommittees. So for all of your awareness, they're sort of launching into phase 1 of outreach, which is to remind you from the proposal that they've shared with you before, the development of an audience analysis, the development of specific one-on-one interviews with all of your input about who they should be hearing from, and lastly, the development of 2 roundtables. And again, hearing from you all and the other subcommittees about who should be around the table for those. One roundtable specifically focused on BIPOC members of the community. And so next week, they've asked for an hour on every other subcommittee's agenda in order to sort of give them an overview of the proposal that they shared with you all, and then discuss in more in-depth, have a conversation about phase 1 and the timeline around that. And how subcommittees can provide input and support for them as they're sort of starting along that process. And so our expectation is that first phase of framing the issues and listening to Vermonters around the concerns that they have with the Global Warming Solutions Act broadly, as well as the considerations for the Climate Action Plan, should be done by the end of June, which tees us up for the implementation and development of that first sort of big milestone for specifically the other subcommittees around strategy and recommendation development coming out in June and July, I should say. So about a month off of what our original sort of milestone and target was. And then from there, we'll implement the public engagement plan, which I'm sure will also be vetted with all of you in the coming weeks, which will be ongoing throughout the summer and into the fall, testing those strategies and recommendations to inform what the final strategies and recommendations will be to be knit into the Climate Action Plan. So it's great to have them on board. I think the next step is really pulling in some feedback from the other subcommittees, and likely there'll be a touch point back into this subcommittee in the coming weeks too, as we embark on that and really get going on phase one of the outreach and engagement. So that's all I have for an update tonight, but happy to answer any questions related to that. And maybe as I just noticed Claire's face in the middle of my screen, I'll just also comment quickly that another sort of due diligence in that is we'll be meeting with the Public Service Department next week, and Claire and her colleagues, as well as their facilitator, to think about the scheduled engagement and outreach that the Public Service Department has in mind for the Comprehensive Energy Plan, and how the two processes can be additive to the outreach and engagement and not in conflict with each other. So we're looking to support each other and work together on that.
Excellent. Any questions for Jane? I'm going to add two quick announcements. First, I want to
One second,
recognize.
Sue, I see Chris has his hands up. Maybe he might have a question.
Thank you, Chris. Sorry. And thank you. I cannot see the chat, so thanks for checking that with me. Go ahead, Chris.
Jane, I'd raised a question about the public participation proposal. Municipalities weren't on there. Are they going to be added? Do you know?
I'm sorry, and their proposal, the Climate Access Rise proposal that we saw, that targeted outreach. Is that
Yeah, as I recall, the municipalities weren't on there. Have they been added?
Not right now. This is the chance to consider them as a stakeholder, I would imagine, in these interviews and roundtables. I also think, as you know, Chris encouraged us to be thinking about how we engage at a regional level, and the Public Service Department is doing that very well through their process, and we're planning to, that's one of the conversation points and touch points that we hope to bring sort of additive communication or engagement to the Comprehensive Energy Plan process, and vice versa when we meet next week to think about those regional workshops that are already set up for June. So that's a regional level, but yes, I think we should be thinking about how towns fit in as stakeholders in the next phase of process.
Sorry, we just had a staff person walk in. I waved at them. I wasn't waving at anybody else. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank
and hopefully,
you.
Sue, one of your announcements will hopefully be the per diem testimony. So I'll let you do that.
Yeah, thanks. I had two announcements. And first, I just wanted to recognize Iris, who wrote a really great piece, which you can find in the VT Digger, relating to her passion for this work and our call to action, essentially. So thank you for using your voice, Iris. And the other announcement from me is that I have been working with Jane and a few others who have been trying to advance ways to add more money to pay for the folks who are using their time to join us. And one of those was to try to see if we can literally double the per diem that you all right now, the members have access to for each day you're joining us. And we'll continue to send information about that. And we're also hoping, Jane, when a coordinator comes on, if people need help with that, we might have more assistance to access those dollars. And the conversation was robust and very supportive from the Senate Government Operations Committee. The challenge they have is doing something for one of our boards and commissions and not all of the rest, and how the challenge that poses for them. They might consider this as essentially a pilot to demonstrate if, in fact, we have the ability to pay more, which our budget we think can accommodate. Will it actually bring and retain more engagement? So we're going to continue that conversation. I was glad to be able to testify and certainly be heard. And Senator Rahm is working on that sort of on our behalf.
I think we lost Sue for a second there.
Oh, no.
Where'd you go, Sue?
Any questions on that?
Sue, we missed the last 20 seconds of what you said because your internet froze, unfortunately.
Can you hear me now?
Yep. Yep.
So if that happens again, I'll just go off video, and I'm just going to say we're trying to help everyone be compensated more for the time they're giving. So we're not giving up on that, but we haven't concluded that with the legislature yet. Any questions? Okay. Any other announcements? And how about reports from other subcommittees that folks may have joined? All right. Hearing none, I will move on to.
Actually, Sue, can I?
Yes.
I know I'm not the official liaison, and I don't. But as also staffing the Science and Data Subcommittee, I just want to pass along that subcommittee is working on its work plan still, and I think one of the challenges we're having is that, like you, we're exist to support the other subcommittees. So to the extent that the subcommittee starts to have needs for science and data that they know they would like to rely on that subcommittee for assistance with, I think that we're starting to try and get a better feel for those asks as we develop that work plan. So I'll put that out there to the extent those things start to come up, to pass them along either through me, or I know Danielle's been attending our meetings too. Danielle, you should feel free to speak up when we have sort of updates like that. So thanks.
Thank you. And certainly anyone, staff or subcommittee members, are very welcome to help us stay on top of things. All right. Any other questions?
I see Iris has her hand up too.
Thank you. I can't see the hands at all. Thank you. Go ahead, Iris.
I just wanted to mention at the Ag and Ecosystems meeting, there was some really good discussion around a piece that Judy Dow put together. I don't know if this link that I just put in the chat is going to work for everyone because I'm bad at sharing from Microsoft, but I just think that it would help if everyone read that at some point. It should probably help inform some of our guiding principles, and there was some good conversation around that. Kai was also there, so I don't know if you have anything else to add on that, but it's really, really impactful thing that we should be centering in our work. So.
Thank you for sharing that, Iris. It's really good. It was really, really good. I'm glad that she was honored.
I believe that document was forwarded by Jane to the entire Climate Council. And so Jane, maybe you could forward that on to this subcommittee as well.
I haven't clicked on what Iris just shared. I shared Judy's stewardship ethic that she put together for the Climate Council and with all the subcommittee co-chairs, not co-chairs, all the subcommittee members. She took it a step further, I might offer, at the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee in a presentation that led to some questions that she posed. And Lauren Oates and her together really thoughtfully digested those. And I've shared them now with the co-chairs, and I know of this subcommittee. And I know that Judy was encouraged, and we invited her to join us this evening for this conversation as you start to think about that work and how it could inform the principles and then ultimately the questions you're going to try to tease out in today's conversation. But unfortunately, she teaches at 5:30, and so couldn't be here for that time. So I'm not sure if she was going to join for part of it. She never responded or not, but it would be really nice to give her the opportunity to speak to those points with this committee in particular, and how it might inform the guiding principles, and then ultimately also the assessment that you put together in those questions. Oh, good. So Iris, it is what I shared already in the email. Oh, good. I wasn't 100%.
Thank you. Well, maybe we can invite her early in our, as a community listen kind of piece for next time. That might make sense.
And just, I'm sorry to interrupt, Sue, but just to Steve's point, that this document is posted with the Ag and Ecosystems Subcommittee, because it was a document that meeting used as an open meeting. So it's on the supporting documents for Ag and Ecosystems for people to access.
Thank you.
Nadia has a hand, Sue.
Wow, I can't see that. Thank you, Nadia.
If you hit participants, this took me the last time I was facilitating, it'll show you who has their hand raised. And I'll lower my hand now, but this isn't feedback that I received in listening to other subcommittees, but from representatives of and members of other subcommittees. The recommendation that we, as we draft our principles, look at it from an economic equity and generational equity lens as well, as something that's important and perhaps missing, as well as the ways in which individual subcommittees can, and we're going to discuss this later today, but narrow the language in a way that it includes the vast index of proposals that they're going to be considering. So, you know, if we're going to do weatherization, for instance, how do we look at something like job protections or fair share and directly apply it to specific programs? And I thought that feedback was exceptionally helpful as we dive into this next phase of drafting.
Thank you. Any other kind of points, comments, announcements, or reports? Okay, let's
Actually,
turn.
Sue,
Yes, Kaya.
if I may, I'm sorry I didn't raise the Zoom hand, but I wanted to sort of dovetail off of both what you all have said here and support that if you are on social media, if you're on Facebook and you go to visit Rights and Democracy's page, we had a fantastic conversation with researcher Ian Haney-Lopez that talks about the race class narrative and about how you cannot separate the two. And if your economic justice is not centered in racial justice, it continues to create racial divides. And so it's really around how we re-heal by like both centering racial justice within our economic conversations in a really interesting, nuanced, and important way that kind of helps, I think, as we're trying to reframe how to do this for folks that are in different places of understanding how we're working towards a collective liberation in this work. So I just want to recommend that. It was a phenomenal conversation, very frank, but really, really good. And his work is phenomenal. So just suggesting that. I'll try to put it in the chat if I think of it after I'm done with my whole thing.
Great. Well, why don't we move to your whole thing?
I see one more hand from Kashka. Sorry.
It's
Thanks,
so
David.
weird. I can't see the hands. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, David. Go ahead,
Thanks,
Kashka.
David. Hi, Sue. Kaya, can you repeat that one more time? Where on Facebook? What?
Yes, and I apologize. We just couldn't everybody's having tech problems, so we couldn't stream to YouTube like we normally would. But you could find it on Rights and Democracy's Vermont Facebook page, and I will try to grab the link and send that to put it in the chat.
Thank you.
Are there any more hands that I can't see, David? All right, Kaya.
Last one was a wave. It wasn't a Zoom hand.
Kaya, thanks for taking it from here for a bit.
For sure. So hello, everyone. If you didn't get a chance to hear me at the beginning when we were introducing ourselves, I'm Kaya Morris. I use she, her pronouns. And I am the Movement Politics Director for Rights and Democracy Vermont. So I'm taking some time today to both do a little bit of my historical story, and then brought more broadly into the work that it is that I'm bringing into this space and the communities that I'm hoping to lift through this work as a member of this subcommittee. So just my history, which you may have found through multiple Google searches pretty easily, goes back to being born in Chicago and coming from the Midwest in that area, and was from an early age, without realizing it, being a part of national history, where my family was one of the few selected for a pilot program that sought to resolve the issues of segregation in public housing. There was a lawsuit that came through brought by Dorothy Gautreaux that found that the Chicago Housing Authority was intentionally segregating people of color into horrible tenement slums, third world conditions that still exist to this day in many parts of the country. And so Dorothy took this case all the way to the Supreme Court, and ended up being a landmark case that actually set to the stage for what we now consider to be Section 8 and portable vouchers, our voucher system for housing. So my family was a part of that initial group that did the big move of going from the city to all white suburbs and being the first to integrate those communities and all of the slings and arrows that come with that. So I stand on the shoulders of my mother when it comes to much of the work that I bring. I also stand on the shoulders of my great-grandmother, my great-grandmother Clara, and no, I'm sorry, my grandmother Clara and my great-grandmother Beatrice and her husband Bud, J.R. Cole, who were members of Mount Zion Episcopal Church down in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and their church was seeking to become one of the Freedom Schools, a site of the Freedom Schools. And it was something that was obviously a huge part of our country's history that they were intentionally stepping into in one of the most violently racist areas. So I feel you so much, Chris. You know these histories, you know these stories. We got that Neshoba County thing happening over here too, right? So we, my family was a part of that. And what happened from that was in one of the days that they came out of a normal church meeting, a group of Klan members came. It was a huge mob of white men that came, and they violently assaulted all of the people that were exiting the church. And then it was elders, it was children, it did not matter. And the way that the legend goes is that my grandmother dropped to her knees and started crying out prayers to the heavens and psalms. And something about the way that she was praying kind of snapped them out of their moment so that they stopped, the violence ceased, but then they burned down the church. My great-grandfather suffered very deeply from that. They had to transport him to Chicago because no hospital in Mississippi would see him. He ended up with a permanent disability and was forced to let most of his 100-acre farm go fallow because he could not maintain it anymore with the injuries he had. After that, this is where you may have also heard the story of the 3 civil rights workers, Goodman, Cheney, and Schwarmer. I know, Sue, you know about this family history too, as well, who went down and were sent down to go investigate the church burnings and the assaults. And they were then arrested. The Klan was notified. They were arrested, brought into a jail, released from the jail where a mob was awaiting them down the road, and then they were murdered. So that movie, it was turned into a movie, Mississippi Burning, if you remember that from back in the day. So it's been a long part of my family's history to be on the forefront of fighting for these things. I myself went to college to the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign and graduated with a degree in gender and women's studies. My thesis work was actually a little bit of a diversion from the seriousness that you see always in me, where I was doing a deconstruction of the race, class, and gender issues within the Harry Potter literature series. And I'm one of the country's first Harry Potter scholars, as we were affectionately called back then. So I went on to go do a lot of nonprofit work, working within racial justice and in fighting against sexual and domestic violence and child abuse. Moved to Vermont a little over 12 years ago, and after a whole series of incredible life experiences and a layoff from the work that I loved in Chicago, and was looking for something else to do. And friends said, come cry on a couch here in Vermont. That's where all celebrities come to hide. Come figure out what you want to do and then take it from there. And so I did. And I came and I loved the beauty I loved the nature. I missed that, having lived several years in Seattle in the Pacific Northwest and being involved very heavily in arts management and in the arts community there, doing also sexual violence prevention work out in that area. And missed that going back to the Midwest. Was looking for work all over the country, and a position came up in Bennington. And so I said, why not? I'll apply. Who knows? And it ended up being I got the position, and I made the decision to change and to move here to Vermont. Fast forward a few years, about 7 years after that fated moment, and I was a part of an incredible national program that was one of 12 women that was selected to show that we had promised to change the shape of the nation. And in my cohort were incredible people. My mentor was Pernell Spears Lopez, who is the former CEO of IKEA Furniture, who made it the name that it is today. And they really were encouraging me to consider running for office, political office, which was not something that I had any interest in at all, not even the slightest. Even though people had asked me, it didn't seem like it was a fit for me. But this group of people, some had worked on the Obama campaign, President Clinton's campaigns, Hillary Clinton's campaign, folks that were all there, the founders of Kiva International, you name them, chief of staff at HUD, all these incredible people were like, yeah, no, this is what you should do. And so when I came back to Vermont, I made the decision to apply for and was in the first class of Emerge Vermont, which is a training program to train women to run for political office. Actually, Sue was one of our instructors at one point. So that's how I first got to meet Sue back in the day. So I ran for office and I won in an incredibly competitive, difficult race. I was a grassroots candidate with no money. I knocked on doors. I got to talk to people. It was all about building relationships and hearing folks from where they were at. And so even though we might have been politically, ideologically on opposite sides, there was commonalities to our entire experience, which is again why I was promoting this Ian Haney Lopez talk. There were commonalities that were truly important for us to move towards change. And so I actually won votes across party lines and served for 2 years. Made the decision to leave that position in 2018 after a series of kind of like the canary in the coal mine for all of the racial unrest that we're seeing here in the state, all of the violence and the threats, the cyber stalking, the harassment, all of those things that we're seeing that are happening here within our state house, within our local elected leaders, within our people of color who are stepping into appointed positions and prominence that you're seeing on the federal level. All of this was, I was right in the maelstrom. I was right in the center of that maelstrom. And there were so many different factors that led me to have to make the choice to leave, to protect my family, to support my family through an overwhelmingly difficult life challenge beyond even just that. And so made the decision to step away. So now 4 years later, here I am. Here I am, still working, still fighting, still pushing to try and make Vermont a more just place. Still working closely with the legislature and our state government, working on a municipal level, doing diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings for corporations, nonprofits, and groups worldwide to really just kind of do what I can to build the stamp. So I'm no longer living in Bennington, which is why I have the smile I have. I've lost the weight I have. My skin's come back to life. For multiple reasons. And it's been a beautiful journey to be in the new place that I'm at and to have this role. And I'm very excited to be able to be here with you today. So I guess I can pause there briefly to offer if there's any questions that folks want to ask. I do have much more to share. And also Jane, if I can get co-hosting, I'll need that for the second part of this. Okay, perfect. So let me see here. All right, I'm a host now. So what I wanted to be able to share with you was a little bit more of the work that I'm kind of in the center of right now, which I think is very exciting, and it will give us an opportunity to expand out a little bit of what we think and what we understand about the work that we're doing. So I am going to share with you, I'm going to do a little PowerPoint. I'm a visual person. So it's helpful for me to do this. So hopefully this will work out for everyone. Uh-oh. Oh, for real. Don't do this to me. Not when Kaya's got a really good PowerPoint for once. Hang on. Zoom's been super picky this past couple of days, if you haven't heard. There we go. Hey, very exciting. Okay, so I'm here to share with you about the work that we're doing within Rights and Democracy to try to build a movement for a just and equitable future. So I'm going to share with you a quick video that will tell you a little bit more about us as an organization.
Our vision is to build a just, equitable, and ecologically sound future in which all communities can thrive. And we know that the way for us to get there is by making the journey together. Just as the crises we confront are interconnected, so are all of our stories and struggles. Over generations, working people of all racial and ethnic backgrounds have come together to fight for freedom, justice, and equity. For as long as we've been fighting, powerful opponents have tried to use our differences to divide us for their own profit. Yet, time after time, we unite across our difference to win lasting change. Whether we are out in the streets or inside the voting booth, we know that together, we have the power to transform the future. During these challenging times, we need each other more than ever, and our collective action has never been more important. We need you. Join us.
So, thank you. So I did want to also begin this presentation by offering a land acknowledgement. So this gathering that we are on today is located on the land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among Indigenous peoples for thousands of years and is home of the Western Abenaki people. We honor, recognize, and respect these people, especially the Abenaki, as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which we gather today. In that spirit, today we will begin by acknowledging that we are guests in this land. We need to respect and help protect the lands within our use. So I think it's important for me to center this because you've probably heard me talk about this a million times, but we often say we are trying to unpack the aspects of white supremacy that have built into our systems and that we are trying to undo to address this climate crisis. So it's helpful to start with a definition of that, which is slightly different than what we'll talk about when we're thinking about how we're going to build collective liberation. So what is white supremacy? It is historically rooted and it is systemic. So white supremacy is the system of oppression that centers white, cisgendered, heterosexual, able-bodied, Christian, biological, and performative maleness as the access points to power in all forms. It justifies the power and domination of all systems, societies, and ecosystems to work in service to those who benefit from that centering to the lethality of all others. Think about it as a center that creates a sense of normalcy. This is who we consider to be normal. This is what we are all aspirationally seeking towards. We're looking for that melting pot, is what we've been told we need to reach. This is where we need to go to find that center, which instead diminishes all of the other aspects of our lives, our cultures, and our ways of being that run contrary to that may, in many ways, be more effective, more efficient, more sustainable than the ways that we've currently been functioning within our extractive societies. And so because groups that do not, and individuals who may have intersectional identities cannot fit into this space of normalcy, this center circle of normalcy, we're constantly battling to get in or out of that power. So you may have seen this before, and I just think, again, it's important for me to just name this, that the characteristics of white supremacy culture, which come from a fantastic framework from Kenneth Jones and Tima Akun, it's been around for a minute, but it always remains salient, is that we built in, within our systems, ways of functioning that are dysfunctional. Within there, we place an emphasis on thinking about perfectionism within our work, a sense of urgency, which we've heard and pushed back even within this committee, a defensiveness rather than an inquisitiveness or a curiosity, thinking about quantity over quality, how much can we get done, not whether or not it will stick. a worship of the written word, which places a greater emphasis on data and numbers and reports than on lived experiences, stories, and histories. And also a recognition that that history may be and is often dictated by someone other than the ones who lived it. It's about a paternalism. We're doing this for you on your behalf because this is what you need, rather than recognizing the own inherent wisdom of those that you are here to serve. And either or thinking, we can either do it or we can't. We can either have it or we can't. And it leaves no space in between to say both and. A power hoarding. Only certain folks get to make these decisions. Certain folks get those finances. Certain folks get to have the final say. And it is not a distributive method that helps to ensure that all voices are heard. A fear of open conflict, so an unwillingness to take a risk of making a mistake or acknowledging when harm has occurred out of a desire to keep the peace. And so what that does is it removes a humanity from spaces that need to see us as our full selves. It's around an individualism. It's a bootstraps model that says we are pulling ourselves up and we are carrying ourselves through our own merit, through our degrees, through our access to wealth, through me, rather than a collective we. And success is driven by and led through specific individuals. It's also around thinking about progress is bigger, more, rather than, again, quality, deep. We're going wide versus going deep. Thinking about an objectivity. Objectivity is the name of the game. How can we be neutral on this? We have to find a space that is within a neutrality. Centrality is the key to life. And instead, it becomes the suffocating force that not only quiets voices, but it also removes the ability for us to live in the spaces where we see the differences and celebrate them. And right to comfort. That again, this should feel good. And if it doesn't feel good, then it isn't right. We won't do the things that are difficult and frustrating and confusing. We don't want to show ourselves as ever failing, to ever trip, stumble, and fall, even though we are trying to combat centuries of dysfunction. So just to frame that this resonates, I'm sure, with many of you all, as much of white supremacy culture is reified in our government systems. Sorry. So I needed to pull up this picture. You've probably seen the first two panels of this image, but not the third. So what we always hear is we need equality for all. We're trying to make sure that there's equality in all the work that we're doing. So equality means that everybody gets the same. We all get the same. But as you can see from that first image, not everyone's having the same experience. Only the tallest of the individuals in that picture can actually see over the fence. Then we have equity. So we're going to raise it so that everybody can see over the fence. Isn't that great? Is it really? Does that feel good? Does that feel right? Does that feel sufficient? But then the reality is that that's not really how it shakes out. That we have so many different barriers that we are trying to overcome that quite often people are still way up at the top. Maybe some people are able to look over the fence, but some people are underneath the actual lawn in and of itself. And we also haven't even asked our questions. Why is there a wall to begin with? Why are we not in the game? Why are we not in those stands? What are we holding on to that's giving us so much comfort in the exchange between where we want to be and building worlds that don't yet exist to where we currently are? Are any of these actually really what we want? So it's our job to try to push further. So Rights and Democracy as an organization, as you heard, we've been around for over 5 years, and we really are at the forefront of trying to work with entities and organizations. We are not the only solution. We are one of many within a larger movement that's trying to move folks who have been most impacted by our overlapping crises from the outskirts into the center and the seats of decision-making power and influence. And so we were able to join with a fantastic project called Renew New England. So I'm going to give you all another little video, which I think you'll really dig.
Picture this with me. On the other side of this pandemic, we wake up to a new New England. A wave of crises made it clear we couldn't sustain the old normal that had left so many of us behind. So we finally built an economy that works for everyone. We got here because we made a detailed blueprint for the future, and we organized a historic grassroots coalition to pass it into law. But none of this was inevitable, because for too long, we weren't the ones drawing up the blueprints. This is Bay City, 5.9 million square feet of development that will go up on the shores of my neighborhood in Dorchester. Right now, it's just a blueprint. The future of this place hasn't been decided yet. In one future, local organizers force developers to build affordable green housing that brings thousands of good union jobs directly to my community. But next door, I see the other future of Bay City. Another luxury development that profits by ignoring my community's needs and pricing my neighbors out of their homes. Across New England, communities like mine struggle to survive in a world that we didn't design. A few investors profit while whole neighborhoods go without. Our future has to come from ordinary people like you and me. And in this moment of crisis, we have to think at a whole new scale. That's why this year, frontline communities, racial justice organizations, labor unions, indigenous communities, youth climate leaders from all across New England got together and made a plan. We're building the power we need to actually win in our states and show the country what's possible. Here's where we start. We put tens of thousands of people to work in good union jobs that pay a living wage. They build green homes in local communities across the region, driving down utility bills and cutting carbon. We invest in our farmers, building a regional network of small rural farms and urban community gardens so that no family has to go hungry. And we shut down polluting industries in frontline communities, funding cleanup projects so that everyone can breathe clean air and drink clean water. We always had the resources to take care of each other, and we always had the power. What changed? We got organized. A better world isn't just possible, it's necessary, and it starts with us. Picture this.
So this is really a birth coming out of the Green New Deal and the conversations that we're familiar with from the Green New Deal. And so the question that everybody asked at that national table, which Rights and Democracy was at through our partners, our national partners, is it enough? But what we came to realize, even within the states that Rights and Democracy covers across Vermont and New Hampshire, is that climate justice is not centered in racial justice and meaningful reparations, and that direct benefits to BIPOC and other communities are aspirational at best. It's a recognition that BIPOC communities are not highly visible, nor in leadership in the Vermont and New Hampshire climate movements. And then we also had to recognize that BIPOC labor within the climate movement, it still often works to service of white constituencies, just because of the nature and the reach of white supremacy. And so BIPOC are often and are quite universally the least contributors to our climate and energy crisis, and yet we're the constant bearers of the deadly associated harms. So we see the work that we're trying to do as a hopeful approach to collective liberation. Again, our impacted communities know what we need to be made whole from the climate and energy crisis, and we should be leading those efforts from design to implementation. We can look at those empty buildings and know exactly what we've been dreaming of for years. We can look at those brownfields that should be a park that feels safe and understand exactly why it is not. We have been in deep research on those solutions for quite some time without ever being asked. So those considerations must be held tight, that any solution should be driven by the hopes, the needs, the dreams, and the demands of those that are most impacted. BIPOC should be compensated for their labor, which is extractive and necessary, without which this work is incomplete. And our efforts should amplify current efforts that are led by those communities to address these crises. And I love this quote. It's one I use all the time. It comes from Lila Watson, who's an Aboriginal elder and activist. And she says that if you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. So the Renew New England Alliance started in January of 2020, right before the crisis hit, right? And it was a combination of over 150 different social and economic, justice, labor, and indigenous organizations from each state in New England. We have university and other nonprofit research partners. It's about a decarbonization modeling process centered on commitments to equity and justice, and it's supported through a cohort of elected champions across the region. So through our role within Rights and Democracy, our C4 side, we have both a C3 and a C4. We endorsed a whole slate of candidates everywhere from your high bailiffs up to Congressman Welsh, who have all agreed to help support this vision. So our goals are not that unfamiliar to you. We're trying to develop a thriving, equitable, and sustainable local economy that centers the priorities of workers and frontline communities and creates good paying unionized jobs. Our goals are a little bit more aggressive in that we're trying to get to a zero carbon energy sector by 2030 and a zero carbon building and transportation model by 2040. And we're looking to enact reforms that make government inclusive of and accountable to the communities that it serves. We have at the center of this, and I will say it again, it is the heart of all of this, is a jobs guarantee. So as we heard folks talking about earlier, how are we going to bring in the economic modeling and the generational wealth questions into this work? We need to look at the multiple ways in which we can ensure that everyone who wants to have a job will have one. Our vision is to preserve and create jobs, especially unionized jobs, to support local, small, and emerging businesses, to look at public employment initiatives, and to really support the core commitments of improving and modernizing our regional infrastructure and ensuring that everyone's basic human needs are met. This all sounds familiar, right? We're on the same page here, right? So we're thinking about 6 basic needs around this job guarantee. It's centered around housing, healthcare, food, energy, transportation, clean air and water. And we also have additional policy demands that we're looking at around financing, perhaps the potential of creating a regional state green bank. We are also here in Vermont, the way that we are treating this within the 2021 fiscal year and this legislative cycle. Across each state, we are lifting up 3 initiatives at a minimum to try to support green housing retrofits, food justice, and what are called green justice zones. And you've heard some of this in the previous presentations from Rejoice and through the Center for Whole Communities and the Vermont Law School. So we recognize that there are blind spots in energy justice and that the energy burdens for individuals of color are significantly higher than that of our white communities. And so to try to address this, we are all in and trying to create mechanisms for green housing retrofits, looking at safety repairs, weatherization, sustainable energy, smart meters, and more. Our goal is to be able to get our profitable utility companies to help support these costs and that they will look to adopt a progressive rate structure. We are also looking at our food system and recognizing that due to COVID, 1 in 3 people are food insecure, 1 in 7 in New Hampshire are uncertain where their next meal is going to come for. And then we look at the number of farms that are still existing here in the United States, and especially here in Vermont, and from our 2017 data, not even our current census data. We're looking at numbers at 1.5 for Hispanic, non-white, 0.2% for our Black population, 0.19 for our Asian population. We're looking at 0.3% for Native American, and of Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders is 0.08. We are also looking at land food justice. I'm sorry, hold on a moment, Jamal. We're looking at food justice, which is looking at a project to do land procurement and reclamation. We have short form bills in each of these areas of focus right now, and this one's in a House agriculture. And so it's looking at supporting throughout the food systems from producers to distribution. We're trying to provide financial support for small independent farmers and BIPOC businesses who use sustainable ecological practices and fair labor standards. We're looking for folks who are trying to step into the agricultural sector to be able to be a part of our food system in vibrant ways. We're looking at grant opportunities to purchase land, greenhouses, water, seeds, farming equipment, technical assistance, food delivery vehicles, and compensating workers. We are also really trying to look at the fact that we need no more sacrifice zones. And you've seen some of this modeling. This was from an earlier version. We do have newer versions that we're updating the slide deck with, but all recognizing that all non-environmental harm is equal. And so we're very excited to be working closely with Dr. Bindu Pamakar within the modeling work that we're using within Renew and obviously here within the Climate Council. So green justice zones, just really briefly, it's what we're looking to do is try to push within 2021, 2022, the approval of creating a publicly funded pilot project for 1 to 2 environmental justice hotspots in New Hampshire and Vermont. This comes from the really promising practice we've seen out of Providence, Rhode Island, where the BIPOC communities organized and were able to have the municipality stop, look at those justice zones, those hotspots, call an end to those pollutions and the harms that were taking place, and have this BIPOC council do a participatory budgeting process with community members to determine where a reallocation of millions will go to revitalize their communities. Again, folks have been dreaming about this for forever, and it's time to give the support to make sure that that happens. So they are now done that in Providence, and I know that they're introducing a statewide bill as well. So these funds are distributed through a local participatory process and referendum process with zone residents. We talked a little bit about this. So our solutions, as we're coming forth with it, there's a blank bullet, ignore that one. Let's just, check things right now. So our C3 solutions, we have a BIPOC advisory council of experts, policy advisory committee that's building a pathway to increase access to power, representation, and restorative processes, and are helping to remove the structural barriers to full participation in the movement. We've dedicated funds to ensure that these folks are compensated for their time and their effort, and their work has had an enormous difference, both here within this committee, on the larger Climate Council, within Senator Ram's environmental justice bill, really building out and creating and crafting a framework for those definitions that you'll see within that bill. We're also building out our coalition and collaborative partners to work closely with those already in the movement, inspiring others to join. We're working closely with groups like Rejoice, the Center for Whole Communities, NEFOC, Vermont Land Trust, 7th Generation, and more to do this work. We believe that together we can win. And so the last piece I want to share with you is that, again, as we've stated, this struggle that we're on it may feel new to some of you, but it's not new to us. And the struggles that you're seeing for yourself, you're feeling, we've been feeling for forever. And the difference that is necessary for us to be inclusive in our language, in our intention, and in the work that we're doing is so that we don't have to fight to get ourselves in there. We want to be able to see ourselves, look at a document and see ourselves reflected in the plan. It's a completely different conversation when you are visible versus when you have to fight for that visibility. So it's recognizing as well that we're taking on the pains of accepting societal wins sometimes that do not have substantive change for individuals and communities. And we need to change that. But we need to recognize that sometimes we will be critical because sometimes those solutions are not the right solutions, but we're going to all do our best. So that is what I will say around this. I'm excited about this work. I'm happy to tell you any more stories on it. I do recognize our time, and I'm grateful for the time to share this with each of you.
Thank you, Kaya. Wow. What a community listen. I see many. Now I can see the hands applauding. Are there questions for Kaya? Well, I have a feeling that there will be questions for Kaya as we continue through our process together. Am I missing anybody's hand, David?
Chris.
I see Chris.
I've got a big one for you. You and I have discussed it some, but has your group specifically looked at the structure of government and governance in Vermont? I'd be real curious what, to me, it's so fragmented and so diffuse that it is really easy to perpetuate white supremacy, given the scale of it. And that's not to say you blow it up necessarily, but I'm curious if you guys have dug into like comparative systems about what works and what doesn't.
So we are looking at all of that, and that part of what we're trying to do is we're trying to build grassroots power. So some of the ways that we try to change these systems are having folks that are willing to step into these systems and to raise those red flags, to recognize that the way that y'all are functioning is not, it's not going to work. To be able to do that, because it takes all in. So we have been looking at alternative models, and there's some solutions that we are trying to work on, but not broadly across state government. Something I did need to lift, if you have not had a chance to read it. So the Renews BIPOC Affinity Council did send a letter to state government, to our administration, and as well to the Climate Council that really outlines a lot of what we talked about today. And I'm so pleased there's folks that are part of this Renew Coalition that I can see on the call that are like, yeah, we're kicking butt. But this is important for us because as we are wanting to pull people into these governmental systems and structures, even for the purposes of being able to provide critique and expertise, they're also leaving. They're also leaving because of that dysfunction, because they will be within these spaces of power and it feels too much sometimes. It becomes not worth it to keep fighting. It becomes not worth it to keep feeling like you're the person screaming in the corner and no one else is hearing you. And so we have to preserve ourselves as we are still doing all the things and carrying so much of the weight of generations, and even within our own family circles and communities. So that's part of what needs to shift. There's a lot that needs to shift. And it's not even just for BIPOC, because this is a collective liberation. So if one of us are not free, then none of us are free.
Thank you, Kaya, for that powerful presentation and for the work you do both here with us and beyond. We'll have, I think what I want to do just to keep us moving is actually to, if our public is willing to wait for the public comment period, I'd like us to get to the part of our meeting where we're cogitating over the issues. So apologies for that, but let's move, David, to your piece. Really, the next two pieces, I believe, you're going to help facilitate our conversation.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. And thanks, Kaya. What a great story. What a fantastic story. Yes, there is hope out there amidst all the drama. Okay. So, and I'll need to share my screen in just a sec. Oh, good. I can do it. Great. So I've been asked to help move forward this process of developing that you're working on and developing draft guiding principles, which also requires the next steps that Sue referenced earlier, which is understanding what we mean by frontline or impacted communities, like who we're thinking about, and also then translating all that into questions or queries that are digestible by these other subcommittees that are going to be doing the work of developing recommendations. So let me frame this up for just a second. I'll share my screen about what I think we're trying to do here. It'll just take me 1 second to get to the right thing. Give me 1 sec. Okay, here we go. That should have it. All right, so what's going on here? Where are you? This is in talking with your co-chairs. Where are we right now in terms of just transitions, providing some powerful input to the other subcommittees to embed the ideas that you want to embed in the work of this climate council as it starts to develop its climate action plan? Okay. There's the first piece to this, which we worked on last week and we worked on previously, which is developing draft principles or guiding principles. And there's a sheet that was circulated. We can take a look at it in just a sec. But that's step number one. And the good news is you've got a great looking draft. At least that's my impression. I welcome others' impression, but it looks like that is going great. I'm sure it can be improved and it's looking great. So that's a good first step. The second piece, as I mentioned, is it's important to talk about the who, right? And there's some terminology that's put around there, whether it's frontline communities, impacted communities. And I think more important than the terminology is really getting our sense, who are the people here that we need to be particularly attentive to? And so that's important to get right. And Kaya's given us a view right now in that in her work about that who, and we need to talk about that in the context of a climate transition, a just transition. So let's see how far if we can get in the next period of time tonight on this. And some ideas were circulated around over email. And then the third piece is shifting then to how do you make this digestible for the other subcommittees? And we talk about sort of questions, right? Sort of what are the questions they should be asking themselves as they're in that creative process of developing recommendations, whether it's around mitigation, carbon reduction, or whether it's around resilience and adaptation, right? So again, let's see how far we get tonight on this, but I wanted to lay these out as sort of 3 steps of this process that need to fit together and that hopefully come together in a draft form in the coming weeks. The sooner the better, right? Because the sooner you get it to the other subcommittees, the more impact it has in their creative process and what they're doing. Okay, Before we go to the who, I just want to make sure that everyone saw the draft that got circulated around on what we're calling the guiding principles or the overarching themes. It looks like this. We worked on it. Kaya led you through a conversation last week about it. It was updated based on that conversation. I'm not particularly excited about doing a wordsmithing on it right now, although I would welcome if people have some really big reflections, if they got a chance to read the new draft. Iris, do you want to say something on that?
Yeah, I was reading through it and I don't really feel like we fully incorporated low income individuals into this work. They're not mentioned in that overarching theme specifically. And then further down, there are some spots where there's some weird language. I know we're not wordsmithing, but the language is super, super weird in the way that it talks about low income individuals. So I think that that's something that we really need to make sure we're incorporating, because that's one of the big sectors of people, I think, that are frontline affected community. So yeah, I don't fully see that reflected in this document. So I just wanted to bring that up and see if we could find a way to make that reflected in this document.
Thanks, Iris. Sarah, did you want to say something about that as well?
Yeah, sorry, I clearly don't know how to use the hand and emoji thing. Sorry about that. But I think this is a really important issue. I'm really glad you raised it, Iris. I think a lot of people would agree. Where you said there's some funky language, I'd love if you point out where that is or follow up in an email so we can make sure we can adjust what's, being, I think that's really important.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So I wonder if, in the interest of time tonight, could we say that maybe Iris, you and the co-chairs and anyone else who wants to be part of it can follow up and do some edits on this to fix this problem? Because if it feels like a problem, let's fix it for sure.
Yeah.
That sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's do that. Okay. Any other sort of big picture things that people want to bring up? That was really helpful, Iris. Okay. All right. Let's then talk a little bit about the who, right? The frontline communities and how we understand that terminology, or impacted communities and how we understand it. There was a document that was also sent around to all of you. It's posted in the agenda for those who are following along with the agenda. It's hyperlinked. It's a document that tries to give some background about how other organizations or other states have tried to focus in on and define impacted communities or frontline communities in the context of climate justice or environmental justice. And I tried to do, and this will be, perhaps I got a good summary going on here, but what I tried to do was put this on a single slide to say, of all that information that was in that background document, there were some common themes that came out. And this may be a good starting place for us to have a conversation about it. So if you look through that background document that was sent around, and that included definitions from NAACP, from Georgetown University Climate Center, from other states, right? And from Thrive and from this National Green New Deal Network. If you look at across that, some themes emerge, right? When we talk about frontline or impacted communities. And I'm going to use those words interchangeably for now. We can decide if we want to pick one between frontline and impacted. One key area here is people who are highly exposed to climate risks because of where they live. They're exposed to flooding, or the nature of how they live, that they're exposed to high temperatures or temperature swings, or other types of climate impacts that we could expect in Vermont or elsewhere, right? So this idea of people who are highly exposed to climate risk. And we'll talk about the reasons why certain people are more exposed than others. And as you can imagine from Kai's presentation, where that conversation could go, right? A second bucket, which is very much overlapping with the first sometimes, are people with fewer resources, capacity, safety nets, or political power to respond to climate or economic change associated with climate change, right? And that could be because of oppression, racism, right? Low income or lack of access to resources, inflexible jobs, and other reasons that make people less able to respond to the kinds of shocks that are happening and that may happen or will happen in the future. Okay, so that's another bucket. Again, potentially very overlapping with the first. There's two more here that I'll throw out that you can see in some of the material. People whose jobs might go away as a result of a climate transition away from fossil fuels and into a more sustainable energy and sustainable ways of living. And then people who have been or are still bearing the brunt of the negative impacts and the pollution from the fossil fuel industry, which may or may not be such a thing in Vermont, although we saw with the closure of Vermont Yankee that, that's part of transitioning as well, as people losing their jobs or people who bore in this top bucket here. And then people who bear the brunt of pollution might be people who live near highways or otherwise have air pollution from cars that are polluting. Okay, so this is like the very high level. And then when you start to think about climate policy and climate resilience, there are lots of folks who would fit into these different kinds of buckets, right? People of color, low income, immigrants, and all the other things that are listed. I took this list from the list that were in those resource documents that were circulated around. Right, so why do I show this? I feel like it's helpful sometimes to tease out like the qualities of folks that we would consider to be frontline, and then who those populations are or groups of people are, which would be that bottom list. And whenever you're dealing with specific issues, it may be different if you're trying to talk about resilience issues around forestry policy than if you're talking about how we help people transition the way they heat their home or insulate their home, right? Okay, so this was an attempt to synthesize that background information. I'll show one more thing before I open it up to discussion about how we want to think about impacted or frontline communities in Vermont. This is the statute that created the Climate Council and this subcommittee, the Just Transition Subcommittee. I put in yellow where they talk in the statute about impacted communities or frontline communities, where they called out rural, low income, and marginalized communities. They also talk about not creating unfair burdens on any groups, communities, geographic locations, or economic sectors. And I put that mostly to make sure that at the end of the day, wherever you all as a subcommittee land, just do that double check that it still is working. You can certainly be a much more nuanced and complete definition. You just need to be careful you're still aligned with what you've been asked to do. Okay, so what I thought might be helpful are looking at these two questions, right? How can we make sure this is really applicable to Vermont, right? And how can we make sure this is really applicable to the work of the Climate Council and the Climate Action Plan, right? So that it will feed right into the questions we want subcommittees to be asking themselves, right? And the final question about the double check against the statute is more sort of like, that's a final thing that I feel is much less important than that first question, but still is worth doing. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other. And I just want to take a period of time. We don't have a ton of time because I do want to spend a little bit of time on the questions before we finish up today. But let's take 15 minutes or so and think about, is that kind of definition working for how we want to talk about impacted or frontline communities? And how can we make this most relevant for Vermont and the work of the Climate Council? So that we are prioritizing and really pushing people to think proactively about groups that we consider to be frontline or impacted communities. All right, I'll stop talking. Reactions. How can we make this better? How can we make this more aligned with what we see as the task in front of us? and more aligned also with the types of stories we've heard in Kaya's, presentation today. How do we make this work for Vermont? I'd be interested, just as a quick, with your cameras on, like, are folks, when you look at sort of that summary slide I did, and is that a sort of, like, okay, yeah, I think we're going in the right place, or like, I'm not feeling it right now, and how we're talking about frontline? I'd just be interested. You guys can do this in front of your cameras, like way I'm doing it. Where are you? Are you sort of in this zone? Are you in this zone? Yeah. Okay. Okay. A little like maybe. Okay. So if you're in the maybe zone, what's driving that for you? Like, what's the reaction going on that we might be able to work on and try to make this better?
Well,
Ashka, yeah, go ahead.
All right. So I guess for me, and this is probably going to sound really simplistic, but I just constantly am thinking about, like, how are we, who are we engaging to engage low-income communities in this whole discussion, in their engagement, and not just low income, but marginalized communities, the refugee population. How are we engaging them in this whole process? Because what I think about is, for us, it's a discussion, but once the initiatives take place, it is, it becomes part of these people's lives. And to think about adding, I just want to know, how are we engaging those communities, or how can we engage them throughout the process, to see how it would impact their lives on a day-to-day, like any of these initiatives. Does that make sense? And I don't want to oversimplify it, but it's just, for me, like, as a sole parent, it's time, and to add things into it and say, okay, well, these things are changing, they're wonderful for the environment, et cetera, et cetera. But I would love to see or hear, how are we engaging those communities in the process, to see how it would impact their day-to-day, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And it's related, Kashka, to the conversations this group has had around engagement, and that now the RISE Consulting and Climate Access team will be moving forward. And in that context, Kashka, I wonder, when you think about impacted communities and frontline communities, you mentioned low income, marginalized, are there ways you would describe that could be helpful as engagement starts to go forward?
So what I think about, whenever any kinds of initiatives are coming forward, I think about the ease of transition. So how can we show that, or not even show, but engage the communities in a way that is going to show the ease of this transition, not something that's going to be another issue for them to overcome, to be compliant with, to have stress, put upon the family, whether it's, single parent households, or marginalized communities, where they're really trying to think about day-to-day survival. So how can we ease this in to show, I mean, for example, people who are getting new housing, could there be something, I don't know, water filters, so they're not spending, so we're not contributing to, I don't know, purchases of bottled water. I mean, anything like this. I know it sounds silly, but just from like a really small point, something that will make this transition easy. I don't know.
Yeah, and I'd love to continue that conversation when we talk specifically about engagement and outreach. And I wonder if we can sort of pick that back up when this group circles back with the consultants who are going to be starting their engagement process. Because I think, Kashka, that's really such an important piece to this, right? Is putting ourselves in those shoes. I want to pivot back a little bit to the who, right? Really, who are we talking about here? And the other reactions people have about, are we getting our priorities right here? Are we understanding what it means to be frontline? Kaya, you want to jump in on that?
Sure, thank you. So I think it does speak a little bit to what Kashka was talking about, but also getting us back. So of the definitions, the one that I thought made me have to get outside of my own context of who I would consider to be frontline communities was the one that came from the Thrive Green New Deal group. And the reason why is, so again, that's looking at a comprehensive strategy to the climate plan, that's looking at jobs, looking at access to financial capital and wealth, looking at opportunities. So they had to get a little bit more specific around definitions, around naming communities that are missing. So for example, youth that are preparing to transition out of foster care, okay? So that is a whole community that could be supported by a jobs guarantee. If we're talking about weatherizing homes, if we're talking about building out infrastructure, these are individuals that you could think about specifically in not only benefiting from the overall solutions, but about engaging in the solutions themselves, because you won't think to pull in those folks if we don't name it. So that goes back to what I was saying even earlier, that if we could see ourselves there, it makes it a hell of a lot easier for us to understand how we might engage or how this work might meet for us. My last little piece on that is like, so if we were thinking about housing, if we're thinking about housing as a solution, the ways that that could help support, when we're talking about low-income individuals, we're often thinking of families. And when we're thinking about our houseless population right now, is overwhelmingly single individuals. And so when we're always looking at single family units, then we're moving away from solutions that might help support that. So if we're thinking about doing reconstruction or rehabbing of old, spaces, that is a group within that whole continuum of thinking about who are the poor and working poor that we're not naming, if that makes sense. So that's what I would want to see. I appreciated the nuance they put into there, or the specificity, shouldn't be a nuance, the specificity they put into there to make me have to think about groups that I would normally speak about when I roll off my shopping list.
Yeah, thanks, Kaya. Yeah, I see Kelly Klein.
Thanks. One group that I saw only on one of the lists that were shared was small business owners, and I know, or small businesses, and I know that's my official hat also. And I was wondering about whether that should be included. And one thing that I did some research, and this being Vermont, I do think it's important to include small businesses. 80% of our employers have 10 or fewer employees. So 80% of our businesses are very small businesses with 10 or fewer employees. And we have almost as many self-employed people as we do those smallest businesses. So 23,000 have 10 or fewer employees and 20,000 self-employed business people running their own businesses. Small businesses, by the broader definition that the SBA uses, employ 60% of our workforce. So there's sort of a direct impact on a lot of our workforce there, and they're not necessarily going to be unionized, or we're thinking about big industries a lot of times, and these are going to be much smaller businesses. And the other thing I wanted to raise was the income. So self-employed individuals with incorporated businesses tend to make a little less than $46,000 a year. For the non-incorporated businesses, which we learned through the COVID relief package, a lot of women-owned businesses and BIPOC-owned businesses are not incorporated. They tend to make less than $23,000 a year. So I do think these are groups this is a group that we may want to include in this list. particularly because Vermont has a lot of small businesses and a lot of very small businesses. Yeah, micro businesses, thanks, Sue. That's a term that we could potentially use. I don't know if there's an official cutoff, because yeah, the SBA says that almost every business in Vermont is a quote unquote small business, because you have to have over 500 employees and make over $250 million a year or something like that to be not a small business. So it's a little bit silly when it comes to Vermont. But I wanted to put that out there. I think that that is potentially something we should make sure we include.
Thanks, Kelly. Abby Willard?
Yeah, thanks. Looking at the different definitions that you shared, I have not heard us talk about, or don't recall it being captured in our definition, looking at particularly incarcerated populations or those persons with disabilities or chronic illness. And I sort of think about that population, that's sort of like an underlying condition that doesn't even allow them to be small business owners or even be able to think about income. And they really get sort of trapped in this place along with many of our other sort of impacted communities. So I guess maybe challenging us to think about how to capture that population, or those two different populations.
So, Abby, you said formerly incarcerated, and then?
I mean, it could be incarcerated populations that include those currently incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. I guess the language is different in some of the various examples. So maybe incarcerated populations is most inclusive.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Iris, and then Sue.
Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit with, I know that this is the Vermont Climate Council, and I know that we are tasked with protecting Vermonters, but I am feeling like if we only identify populations within Vermont, we are doing something wrong, because I think that Vermont is a very specific population by design, and that we can't just outsource our negative externalities to other people. And I think that maybe, like, while we can have a category of Vermonters that we want to have, we also need to like have some question or something where people are considering the effect that we're having on like everyone else. And I think that a lot of people are thinking like very globally because of the issue, but I'm not sure that everyone like is considering every time they're talking about a policy, the effect it's going to have on people who are like in the towns where we are getting our fossil fuels from, or literally in all of these other places where there are a lot of people who are people of the global majority and low income. So I think that it's important to add something about people who are outside of Vermont, because Vermont is kind of a bubble of people that are in some ways have some privilege to be sheltered from the effects of climate change. So yeah, that's all.
Thanks, Iris. Yeah. Sue?
Really appreciate that comment, Iris, as well as all of the comments. And I did want to just mention to Kashka, because I think you were not here when we did hear from the consultants on engagement. So I do want you to know that we will get back to that whole important thing you were raising, and we've begun that discussion as well. I wanted to make sure I have a group to include, and then a question for you, David, but undocumented folks living in Vermont and new Americans, refugees, I think, obviously migrant workers. This, as we grow, Vermont is going to need to bring more and more folks to us, and I see that as a real opportunity for growth for our state. Anyway, and I wanted to ask David if you could remind us, sort of, we're thinking about the who, and are we thinking about, because I'm kind of going back and forth, you made groupings, which was helpful to me. And then you said, no, but who are we missing in the list? So I love this conversation, but I'm trying to figure out, are we going to, are we deciding about, or deciding to include every group we feel we want to include, or would we, because this is going to be part, as I understand it, of the document of the guiding principles that we want to kind of hand off as quickly as we can to the other subcommittees, that really speaks to the who and the what. and so that's what I'm just trying to get. Where do you want us to go with this?
Yeah, thanks, Sue. So I had a really interesting conversation just yesterday with a woman who is leading the work of the equity, I think they're called Subcommittee in Maine, of the Maine Climate Council. And she also did the similar work in New York. And she had a great frame on this, which is, and I will bring back the slide now. She had a great frame on this, which was, think about this on two levels. On one level, you've got something like what's on this slide, which is like a big frame of saying, these are the kinds of people, and these are the specific groups of people that likely fall into these categories on any given climate issue, right? So that's sort of the high level view. And we absolutely want to transmit that in its entirety to other subcommittees. And then there's that next level of analysis to say, I'm working, or as a subcommittee, we're working on these policies around how, the climate profile of the way people heat and cool their homes, right? In this, like, now, who do we really need to think about? And that level of analysis we may not get to, but the subcommittees have our high level view to be able to go do that more narrow view on the particular issue that they're wrestling with. So was helpful for me to sort of, make that distinction. Let's give them a high level view. Let's note that for any given policy issue, you're going to have to do some analysis based on what we've got here to figure out really where do I need to pay particular attention in this policy issue or this dilemma. Kaya, you had asked for this slide deck. Did you want to react
thank you.
to it?
I mean, I was just thinking about this and just with regards to how we're trying to nuance this piece. So I appreciate the themes that are up above, trying to categorize the themes. I'm going to go back to what Iris and others have said, though. I'm a little worried when we tried to regroup people back in together. So those other documents made a specific point of really highlighting who were the different impacted communities, and we removed that specificity by trying to then lump people back in together for the purposes of space or convenience. And it's super important, especially as people are naming, even in this conversation, I'm not seeing, that's also how the public will feel. I'm not seeing myself in this. So it could be a long list, and that's important. I'm sorry, it's complicated work. It's going to be on me. We can handle. So I would love, I mean, I need to go back and look at my notes now too, because I'm like, was this here? I don't see this here. I'm missing where there was a mention of a particular group, or maybe it is included on this list. So I need to go back to my notes and go look at the older versions so that I can see. I'd rather have that full list and then see if we agree than to have automatically edited that out.
Yeah, absolutely. And it could be that this isn't the best way to present as well, right? So I think I would say, let's think about this. And are people seeing themselves in here or seeing what they know is important? Sarah, and then I'll get to Danielle.
Yeah, sorry, and hopefully you can hear me. I'm back on my computer audio. Can you hear me?
You're fine. Yep.
Thanks, David. That was helpful for you to walk through it that way. And thanks for bringing the slide back, because we kept talking about the slide and I was like, I can't see it. I mean, so I'm understanding that I kind of like this idea of the framework, right, that helps us keep asking the questions. And so I'm sort of looking at it that way. And then also understanding that we should go back and look at naming of specific communities in sort of the bottom part that sort of names some specific communities. And I see this approach actually in some of the other approaches that people have done, is sort of like describing like why these are impacted communities and then naming the communities. And so I think that's what you're doing here also. And I like that approach, because what I fear is lost is if we just say youth, seniors, outdoor workers, unemployed, these are our impacted communities. Like, people will be like, well, why are they the impacted communities? And like, I want us to, come out strong so that people go, oh, right, that's why. So because they haven't been on this journey with us and this thinking with us, right? We need to bring them into that thought with us. So I like that about this. And then my only addition and sort of this framework piece, and I can't remember which I saw. I think in the middle, you're kind of you're capturing it a little bit, but I might say it a little bit differently to say that there are communities that have been excluded from economic opportunity and are low income and low wealth communities. And I think that this middle group is getting at that, but it's just framed a little bit differently. Can you say people with fewer safety net resources capacity? Well, why? Because they've been excluded from it. So I just want to like kind of maybe, and it's in the description under there, but I just, for me, that feels like a slightly different framework or descriptor for that.
Yeah.
But I kind of want to sit with it and think about it, and I hear other people wanting to do that also.
Yeah, it really feels like it merits some thinking. And that's, for instance, this language is the language from the Georgetown definition. And, you know, it's very possible that you can name that, you know, Sarah, that language you're giving, perhaps it's much tighter, right? Have been excluded from, right? It could be a better way of saying it. So I wonder, and I'm just thinking for time's sake, were there other people who wanted to jump in? I felt like I saw a hand, but no, I don't.
Danielle, I see Danielle.
Yeah, Danielle, that's the hand, right? Sorry, Danielle. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just looking at those 4 boxes. Well, the slide went away, but the 4 boxes up top, and the one with my worker hat on, the people whose jobs might go away in the climate transition. I'm curious, is it always, when we're talking about frontline and impacted communities, it seems like we're not talking about maybe the positive side of impacted communities, that work will be created. So could those impacted communities also include jobs that are created and the people who are going to be employed in those jobs, which a lot of the groups that you list below would be those employees. And just, I'm not sure if I'm out of line with looking at it that way, but it's just something that popped into my head. And how to protect the people who are going to be employed in those jobs going into the just transition.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think this could be framed to be open to both the jobs that are leaving, the jobs that are coming, right? And then you cross-reference that with people who you're particularly interested in, which would be that second, you know, that second bucket here. Okay, great.
To Iris's point, I like the people who bear the brunt of pollution from today's fossil fuel economy. I sent around an article about the current and growing lithium economy and the impacts that's having on lithium extraction communities. So frankly, I'm almost tempted to say it's not the brunt of pollution from today's fossil fuel economy; it's from today's extraction economy. But then I worry too about using words like extraction, because that's a 25-cent word when maybe a nickel word that more people would understand could make more sense. But you know, we're just because even if we stop drilling oil and stop fracking for gas tomorrow, we're still going to have communities impacted by other extraction issues. So we may just want to revisit that one. But otherwise, I understand the framework. And one other last thing, I'm just going to note, just nothing to, just there are groups of folk out there who look at the frontline impacted communities as just, for lack of a better term, conservative white folk, and their feelings might get hurt about all this work that we're doing. And a lot of the outreach that I've been contacted about what kind of public outreach are you going to do? And I'll describe what we're talking about, which I believe is absolutely critical. Then the question, but what about the people who don't believe in this or don't like it? And, it's like, well, yeah, they'll be part of the outreach too, but with the just transitions, we're talking about people who've been unjustly impacted and people who we need to lift up as we do this work. So I just want to just put a pin in that. I'm sure others have heard about that too, but yeah, so I'll stop there.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay.
I
So-
agree. Can I just say something really
please.
quick? In agreement with what Chris said is about also making a concerted effort to engage with those who, don't believe in it or are naysayers, and trying to meaningfully engage that community without, blame or a voice of, you don't know. I think that's going to be really super important group to engage within, because our entire life as we know it is going to change in the next 30 years. So I think we've spoken about that in other meetings, about just engaging with that group and listening to them and being really open with them. I interact with a lot of more conservative leaning folks in my part-time job, and I really work hard to listen and have dialogue with people who have totally different opinions than I. So yeah, really agree with Chris's point and interested in working on that specific type of work.
That's great. Right, and it speaks to a bigger engagement challenge for sure. Okay, so I am a little conscious of time, and I guess what I'm feeling, I've been taking some notes of this. I know there's other people taking notes of all these comments that have come. Iris asks if we can work offline. You can work offline without a quorum and without email of reply all. And so if it's a small group of folks who take this, digest it, less than a quorum, and then feed it back to all of you, that's perfectly acceptable. And so the key is getting a handful of folks who can take all the good input from right now and translate that into something. And also with the help, we've got great staff support here too, folks. And so we can increasingly tap our staff support to help us take in what people are saying and turn that into language and improve documents. Okay. All right. So are folks okay if we say that's where we are right now in frontline communities? I'll just say in terms of the language, using frontline or using impacted, I am completely on the fence. So whatever you all, I'm not sure, maybe you don't even need to decide. You could just call it both. But if people feel strongly about that, maybe you can send a note around or drop in the chat now or send it as an email to the co-chairs, and we welcome that. Okay, the last thing we wanted to do before going to public comment was that third piece. Remember I talked about the three in this opening slide, the three components of what we can offer subcommittees right away. The draft principles document, which is getting close. It needs a little work, but it's getting close. The who, and now questions, right? The questions are the sort of the translation for the subcommittees of what they really need to be working on and helping to put it in language that feels applicable to their work. I had thought we would have time to do something quickly. Remember the other day when we did one of those boards with
Indra.
Yeah, which was really great. And you guys did a really, very participatory job with that. And I had thought doing something similar. We're kind of low on time, so we may need to push that to another time. And I think we can't, this is one where we would be like dancing around some problem for open meeting laws if we worked on it outside. But I think if I was hoping to do something that looks like this, and maybe this happens next meeting, but essentially taking these principles that we have, which may be adapted if we're feeling that we're not nailing the issues around low income properly, but they're roughly going to be something like this, and trying to throw some questions in there to say, okay, subcommittees, this is what we really want you to be asking yourselves on these things. And we have good language from that principles document that you could translate into these kinds of questions. I threw some on there, taking from your language and also just what I've seen helpful. We don't really have time to do this if we want to do some public comment. So I'm just flagging it as probably the next step in your work together. Chris?
And David, we can talk about this next meeting, but there's one additional, I need to go back and look at the principles again, but one of the ones I felt like might be missing is candor and honesty with regard to the impacts. Because too often what I hear in climate discussions, and this goes back just, kind of lived experience in coal country and other places, where like the solution to mitigating the impacts is put forward like it's going to solve everything. And there will be change, and the change will be uneven, and not everybody will. It's not like you snap your finger, you send somebody to school and they have a job and everything's right with the world. And so I'll look at the principles again and suggest some language. Maybe it's there and I just missed it, but I just want us to be very candid as a council with the public generally, because it's kind of like a pandemic, right? If you actually, ideally what you say is, there are ways to protect ourselves, but bad things will happen if we don't. Bad things may still happen. Just that candor, because then people actually, if it's like, I don't know, disaster preparation or other things, if you're actually candid with people about what the risks are, then, and you're honest about it in all aspects, then they tend to be more willing to engage in it, and both if they're for themselves and also like at a public policy discussion level. So I'll look at that again, but I've just been kind of pondering that over the past week or so, and just wanted to bring that up to the group. It wasn't directly related to what you just put up there, but it's just something I've been kind of chewing on.
Thanks, Chris. So if I tried to summarize things like this, I feel like with your principles document, there's work to do that Iris has flagged. And Iris, I sense you and perhaps Sue are going to take a lead on this with Sarah and others, but on inserting better language around what we're thinking around low-income issues in our principles, right? Chris, if Chris looked through this as well, and if there's language you think would be helpful about the sort of the candor piece that you'd want to put in there, let's do that. We can test that in the next meeting if that feels right too. For the frontline communities, impacted communities, there's a bunch of great information that you all just provided that can get woven back in a way of expressing that feels right to you as a committee, and then can be shared out to others. And so that's some work that staff can do, or a small group can help staff do over the coming week. And finally, I just saw in the chat that there's a possibility of, what if a handful of folks who want to do this over the coming days could do that little board exercise of trying to turn this into questions that make sense in the logic of the subcommittee work. And we could do that, and that could be presented back next week. Right, so that seems like where things are at. Could others just chime in if you see it a little differently?
I was going to suggest that as well. I do want to just make sure we leave 5 minutes at least for comment, but I think it would be great if one or two staff take the lead. There's two projects here. One is kind of coalescing today's work, and then the other is looking at that piece we didn't get to today, the questions. And I think it would be great if we could start next week with the Jamboard sort of started, and people can add or reflect on that. That way we've taken a leap forward. Do other people feel open to that? And if so, I want to ask if anyone put in the chat what they'd like to do. How about that?
Great. Claire's already chimed in. Thank you, Claire. That's wonderful.
Yay, thanks, Claire.
That's great. And
right.
Liz?
Wonderful. Thank you, David. That was great. And I just want to make sure we have a little time. So while people are putting their names in the chat, I'm volunteering for a few things. I do want to open the floor to our public. Thank you for listening to all of this and waiting till the end, which we try not to always do. But thank you. Anybody want to make any comments or reflect upon today's meeting? And go ahead and just unmute. I see Pat is unmuting.
And Carl has his hand up as well.
Thank you. And I'm so sorry I can't see that. So let's go with Pat and then Carl, please.
Hi, thanks. One thing I've been sort of talking about this with people, and they say, well, what is environmental justice? What does this mean? And it seems, and maybe this will happen as part of the outreach, but somehow normalizing this isn't something brand new that Vermont is just doing now. I'm being the Natural Resources Defense Council was using very similar language back in 1991. The public trust doctrine, which is thousands of years old, is sort of a foundation for some of these things. And so I think that kind of normalizing is going to need to be really important in terms of the outreach. The other thing what I found myself looking for was an example, something to give this a picture. And there is a program in Illinois. It's called lowincomesolar.org. And it's one of the most interesting solar programs. And their bottom goal is to reduce people's energy costs 50%. Maybe it was their electrical energy if it's solar, but solar could lead to other types of energy use too. So that might be something to look at for sort of moving from the abstract of all of this to something that is a picture. Well, we could do this in Vermont. So I think those were the two main things. The only other one is the frontline communities and I liked Iris and Chris's comments about, the impacts that are externalized, and the brunt from pollution and manufacturing doesn't go away when we move away from fossil fuels. There's, as I guess Chris put in some articles, but the environmental destruction from the mining of things like lithium and cobalt and rare earth elements is hideous. And at some point, I would like to hope that that level of destruction elsewhere in the world and the working conditions that people are in, literally slave labor, that at least is acknowledged, that if we're doing these other things, there is a price, and that be captured somewhere. So that's all I have for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Carl.
Yeah, I'd like to take off where I think Danielle was going. Looking at the economy, changing economy because of climate change is both an opportunity and a need related to jobs. And this is where groups of people actually have something in common, whether they're workers in the HVAC industry now who are going to be retrained, or whether they're low-income workers, people with less education, people who have been discriminated against. There is a commonality in the changing economy, in housing, in electric vehicles coming along, and weatherizing our houses for opportunities for jobs and training. But because of the disparities in our populations, and I've said this before at one of your meetings, access to education and training and apprenticeships is going to be crucial to allow those people who are most impacted by our economy to join this new economy, maybe with better jobs, with better training, et cetera. And that goes for the HVAC workers now are going to have to be trained into solar and wind, as well as people who've never been trained. So access to education should be part of of what the council has to come up with for all of these building trades and these changes that are happening. Thank you.
Thank you both for these really good reflections. Anyone else? Kira, I see you coming into view.
Yeah, I just had a quick observation. During this discussion, there was a lot of really careful attention paid to language. And something that I noticed throughout the discussion was that the language used is still very individual based. It was very much talking about who falls under what specific categories. And it got me thinking about how perhaps there should also be a focus on relationality and networks in communities themselves, and thinking about how like actual networked groups of people, institutions, systems, and land that exist in relation with one another, how that can be brought into this discussion, because looking at these communities and networks themselves and targeting them could really strengthen the resiliency of this project. So that's just an observation that I made. Thank you.
Thank you, Kara. Is there anyone else who wants to share their thoughts? All right. Well, this was a really deep gathering and conversation. A lot of good ideas, big ideas. Thank you so much, Kaya, for your inspiring presentation. And thanks everyone for sticking with this with us. There are a few members who were trying to get back to us. So if anyone knows those folks who maybe haven't been able to come and can reach out, we'll keep doing that. I appreciate folks volunteering to take on tasks that'll really help us move this forward. And I think probably next week we've got to really conclude these guiding principles. We told them that we would do it in the end of April, and it's the beginning of May. So we will do that. And thanks for the good work, and have a lovely, I think it's still sunny, evening. It's 6 o'clock. Thank you all. We'll see you next week.
Excellent.
Bye-bye.
Everybody.
Bye, thank you.
Have a good evening.